Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Hey YouTube, today is a little different. It's a brand new audio-only episode, no video, but we promise the conversation is fresh. So grab your headphones and dive in. Today, the pro-Israel lobby's partnership with Black politicians.
I appreciate the relationship that I've had with AIPAC from the very beginning of my congressional journey.
The Congressional Black Caucus was founded as the, quote, conscience of Congress. So why are so many of its members silent on Israel's genocide in Gaza? I'm Natasha Del Toro, and this is The Take. Before we continue with today's show, leave us a comment and let us know what you think about today's episode and what stories that you'd like to see us do next time. And if you're on the podcast app, let us know where you're listening from and give us a 5-star review while you're there. It helps the show.
My name is Anthony Conwright. I'm a freelance journalist based in Harlem, New York.
Anthony, welcome to The Take. We are really excited to have you here. So I wanted to start with a clip that I think tells you a lot about where Black Democrats are on Israel today. New Jersey Senator Cory Booker was recently on a podcast called the I've Had It podcast, where he was asked directly if he thinks that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal.
Benjamin Netanyahu, do you think he's a war criminal?
Again, these are questions that a lot of people think are the important litmus tests that are loaded and hot. My urgency is to be an effective leader in bringing an end to this crisis.
And he dodged the question. He could not give a yes or no answer there.
It's like what happens to Democratic politicians, they go through this like prism, and then we can't ever get like the answer to yes or no conversations like you do with Bernie and others. And that's the frustration for the Democratic base with leadership.
Do I think Netanyahu is worse than Trump? Yes.
This is the same guy who gave a 25-hour speech on the Senate floor, taking a stand against President Trump and invoking the civil rights movement to do so.
You think we got civil rights because one day Strom Thurmond, after filibustering for 24 hours, you think we got civil rights because he came to the floor one day and said, I've seen the light. Let those Negro people have the right to vote. No, we got civil rights because people marched for it, sweat for it, and John Lewis bled for it.
So, Anthony, what's the disconnect here? How can he speak with such moral clarity on one issue, but then when it comes to Netanyahu, he can't answer a basic yes or no question?
Well, I think in general, it's easier to speak out against white supremacy in the U.S. if you can disconnect from how it manifests abroad. And I think because the Democrats haven't moved toward sort of civil rights politics where everything is sort of about race in America, they're not able to make larger connections to what's happening abroad that is a result of American white supremacy. And so that's a disconnect, not to mention receiving money from AIPAC might give you a reason to be reluctant to call the prime minister a war criminal.
Right. I mean, he's received, like $800,000 from AIPAC?
Yeah, somewhere around there, his lifetime funds that he's received.
And that's not a small amount of money.
No.
So Senator Booker is a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, or CBC. It's worth noting that AIPAC, which is the largest pro-Israel lobbying group, has endorsed 26 members of the caucus, including all of its leadership, and has raised millions of dollars for them. So maybe we could take a step back, Anthony, and talk a little bit about, what was the CBC's mission when it was founded in 1971, and how does that square with AIPAC?
So when it's founded, we're starting with, civil rights. At first, they're kind of like they're the Black members of Congress that are elected sort of after the Voting Rights Act. And then in 1971, they officially changed their name from the Democratic Select Committee to the Congressional Black Caucus. And so at the core of it is, how do we ensure and I think this is still their mission today, like that Black Americans can achieve the American dream.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why it's important to note that is because it assumes that whatever the American dream is something so ethical that given all the violence that it takes to sustain it, that it's something Black people should have versus changing the dream itself or questioning the morality of the dream, right? And so now, while at the time, most of the Congressional Black Caucus members were elected by majority Black districts, they even say, to Nixon that we don't just represent Black people. We represent our entire constituency. And also that means we have a responsibility as people who sort of understand what it is to be oppressed to ensure that to be a voice for oppression everywhere, especially where America does business.
The quote, conscience of Congress, right?
Right. Which, oh, God, it's so, sorry, I get so frustrated at that. And that's the thing that really sparked the idea to write the piece. And it was frustrating because you then have to ask the question, this is why I referred to the American dream earlier, is what conscience do you represent? It takes a lot of violence to sustain the American empire. It requires so much violence, it's like overwhelming. But then my question is, how do you subvert from within, not accompany? So you're saying we are Black and we understand, our lived experience helps us understand structural oppression. And because Congress is traditionally white, you guys might overlook some stuff. So how can you call yourself the conscience of Congress when you see something like a Palestinian genocide the same? When you're treating Israel the same. So if you're not challenging it, why is it now you forgot your moral compass?
Right. I mean, on paper, the CBC is advocating for things like criminal justice reform, voting rights, expanded healthcare access, and, quote, promoting U.S. foreign policy initiatives that are consistent with the fundamental right of human dignity. Does that include support for Israel in 2025?
I mean, apparently so. If you don't see Palestinians having any legibility as humans worth dignity, then you're going to do that. You're not going to say, well, Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal, right? Or that the IDF is participating in war crimes. Well, then why do you say the American police needs reform? If you held a critique about structural violence from the police, it should be pretty easy to hold that same critique for Israel.
Right. And you have only a handful of this members that back bills restricting arms to Israel.
Right. That's my frustration. It's just we're watching a genocide take place live. It's streamed. You can find grotesque video clips, pictures, children, anything. Entire families have been like wiped out, and you don't have the backbone to say, hey, I can't support this. So I don't understand. I mean, I guess I do understand why the disconnect is there for them. It's because it's money, and they can't engage in like an honest dialogue. And so they have to hide their hand behind, well, we've had this relationship and, America's a friend to Jewish people. And there's been, in terms of Black people, this historic tie between Black American solidarity and Jewish solidarity. Therefore, we have to now give Israel carte blanche to engage in a genocide, which is just, it's crazy to me.
And, AIPAC spent $100 million to defeat politicians that they deemed hostile to Israel in 2024, including two representatives, Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush. What happened to their careers?
Well, I mean, they lost. Like it's hard to fight this. And I think that just reading sort of how long AIPAC has been involved with the CBC, this entity is really, it's a juggernaut, and it's difficult to fight if someone's spending, like $20 million, $100 million, record-breaking amounts of money to defeat somebody. It's hard to overcome that. And so what's really frustrating about what happened to those two is that the Congressional Black Caucus didn't have their back. So how can you sort of say you're representing Black folks, or you have sort of the interests of Black people in mind, when you're literally letting your comrades get picked off by an entity that's representing the interests of a foreign government? There seems to just be cowardice in place of that. And so to me, I say, well, you are a bloc. You have some power. You have some say. You could stand up and say, we're not going to allow this. In fact, I am willing to bet, had they done that, they'd be a much more popular group. And they probably could receive enough funding to actually keep their jobs and have some sort of like political moral standing. And so that's what, is really sad to me about Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush, is that, they were left-leaning Black folks. And there are not a ton of left-leaning Black folks in Congress. And I'm like center of left. I don't mean like the Affordable Care Act. I'm talking about Medicare for all Black folks.
So AIPAC is actually working against Black American interests, even as it's raising millions of dollars for Black candidates.
Right. So a lot of Black interests are actually left of center policies. So let's say Medicare for all, the redistribution of wealth to communities or people in need, government benefits, all of that. If AIPAC is allowed to just pick Black politicians, then we can have situations where they will supplant a Black politician who is for Medicare for all, let's say like a Jamal Bowman, and replace them with someone who might be a little more conservative. And so if AIPAC is allowed to do that, they are fundamentally like acting as an agent against the material needs of Black Americans.
More with Anthony after the break. So, Anthony, we did reach out to the CBC for comment. One of its stated goals is to, quote, promote U.S. foreign policy initiatives that are consistent with the fundamental right of human dignity, as we mentioned before. So I'm kind of curious, how has the CBC responded in the past to other global atrocities like apartheid in South Africa or Darfur?
They led the charge against it. The anti-apartheid laws that were passed come out of the CBC. The first iteration of that law comes from a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. And part of that law was, we're not going to give money to entities that do business with South Africa. The entire CBC was in agreement on this. There wasn't like, oh, well, apartheid's complicated. None of that. They were very straightforward about it. Same thing with other atrocities. Darfur, they've put out statements. They've even talked about Native American genocide in the U.S.
They've spoken out on a lot of these different issues and conflicts. But then when it comes to Gaza, they have remained very noticeably silent. So, how do you compare those two things?
Again, there are scholars, professors, human rights lawyers, human rights organization. Everyone is saying this is genocide. Israel is an apartheid state. And the CBC, somehow we forgot to recognize apartheid when we see it. And so I think, unfortunately, it's a lot of it has to just do with money. I think that's sort of fueling a lot of the contradictions that we're seeing, because you cannot hold on to a name you got, the conscience of Congress, from fighting apartheid, to sort of holding on to that and then going, oh, well, we can't fight it in this instance.
So you wrote in your piece that the U.S. actually influenced the UN's definition of genocide when they were coming up with this definition in the 1940s. How does that fit in with what we're talking about today?
Well, the argument Israel makes is that they're not actually intending to commit acts of genocide, and that it's just sort of happening in their defense of themselves. Well, intent wasn't actually a part of the original definition. That was actually inserted by the U.S. State Department. And we actually took credit for that during a congressional hearing, saying the U.S. is responsible for inserting the intent clause in the UN definition. Now, the U.S. wanted to insert the intent clause so that way the U.S. could say, well, as a country, if there are mass lynchings here, we have laws against murder, so that doesn't count as genocide. And so they also tried to add a complicity clause, which was basically the U.S. government had to be complicit. And they tried to do all of these things to block a definition where they could be held responsible for acts of genocide on Black Americans and indigenous people in this country.
And how do you see that fits in with what we're talking about today when we're, talking about how some of the Black leaders in the CBC are avoiding labeling what's happening in Gaza as a genocide?
Well, that definition was influenced by white supremacy, which the CBC strongly condemns. So if you're going to condemn America's original sin, but not see how that original sin is allowing a genocide to be perpetrated on Palestinians, you're living in contradiction. And you're not actually against white supremacy. You're just against it when you can sort of use it as a performance tactic. And I think if you're going to be against white supremacy domestically, you have to be against white supremacy abroad. And the same thing that prevented Black Americans from redress from the UN, the same thing that made the United States say acts of genocide have never occurred in the US, is the same thing that's allowing Israel to say, wait, we're not committing genocide here.
Black politicians have a harder time raising money than white politicians. And in fact, AIPAC says that they're one of the top fundraisers for members of the CBC. Do you think that for some Black politicians, accepting money from AIPAC and remaining a staunch supporter of Israel is just sort of a means to an end? Like, in other words, accepting this money allows them to stay in office and continue to fight for their constituents?
No, I think that at this point it is a crutch, because I'm like, read the room. If you actually, developed a backbone and you came out and you're a Black person and you said, I'm not going to take this money because of what's happening. I refuse to, and take other Black politicians to account and say, our lived experience in this country, it's completely antagonistic to receiving money from AIPAC. I'm not going to do it. That person, I bet you they would be okay. I think they would have more support than, some folks in the CBC would be afraid they would lose.
And that leads right into my next question, which is, some representatives are starting to read the room a little bit more, right? Like, you have 4 House representatives who recently announced that they're no longer going to be accepting money from AIPAC. But only one of those people, Congresswoman Valerie Foushee from North Carolina, is Black. So do you think that the CBC is going to be left behind on this issue?
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad you said that. Unfortunately, I think Black folks in general are going to get left behind. There is nothing that Bernie Sanders, Zohran Mamdani, there's nothing that they have advocated for that Black people didn't advocate for already. And because we've been sort of confined to supporting whatever the establishment says, we've completely lost any legibility as a progressive force. And I'm so grateful for Bernie Sanders and Zohran Mamdani. And I'm like, wow, there really isn't a Black leader that is a part of this movement right now. And it's reflective, when you go to the crowds. It's a lot of white people. And I think that's awesome. I think it's good. I think we need it. And I just also think it is incredibly sad because they're literally not saying anything that Black people have not already said.
And it sounds like you're saying that, that AIPAC money has ultimately silenced a generation of Black leaders who maybe would have been speaking out against Israel and would have been able to then claim a lot more moral authority when it comes to speaking on the issues of Black Americans.
100%. Exactly that. Exactly that.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Tracie Hunte, Haleema Shah, and Melanie Marich, with Philip Lanos, Spencer Klein, Amy Walters, Farhan Rafid, Fatima Shafiq, Tamara Kandakar, and me, Natasha Del Toro. It was edited by Noor Wazwaz. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Our video editors are Hisham Abu Salah and Mohannad al-Melhem. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.